What if some of the most familiar traditions in Britain are actually the survivors of customs that began hundreds or even thousands of years ago? Every year, millions of people in the United Kingdom take part in rituals that seem perfectly ordinary, gathering around a bonfire, watching a royal ceremony, raising a glass in a pub, or sitting down for a Sunday roast. But beneath these familiar scenes lies a fascinating story. Many of these traditions were shaped by ancient beliefs, religious ceremonies, political struggles, and even attempts to preserve a sense of identity during times of enormous change. The surprising part is that most people who participate in them today may have little idea where they truly came from. And once you discover the origins, even the simplest British custom can suddenly feel like a window into the past. Take the idea of celebrating with a bonfire. Today, the sight of enormous flames lighting up the November sky is strongly associated with Bonfire Night. But the tradition has a much more complicated history than a simple annual celebration. Fire has long held a powerful place in British culture, with communities using it in seasonal festivals and gatherings long before modern Britain existed. Over the centuries, old customs blended with religious beliefs and historical events, creating traditions that could survive even as the original meanings changed. This is one of the most fascinating things about British culture. Traditions rarely disappear completely. Instead, they evolve, absorb new meanings, and pass from one generation to another. What began as something deeply symbolic can eventually become a family outing, a community celebration, or simply an excuse to gather together on a cold evening. The same pattern can be seen throughout British life. Traditions often survive, not because everyone remembers exactly why they began, but because people continue performing them. A ceremony is repeated, a meal is prepared, a song is sung, and eventually the custom becomes part of the national identity. That means Britain is, in many ways, a country where the past is constantly being performed in the present. The real mystery is not why these traditions survived for so long, but how much of their original meaning has quietly disappeared along the way. And as we explore the customs that define the United Kingdom, it becomes clear that behind almost every familiar ritual is a story of transformation, survival, and sometimes a surprisingly strange beginning. Few images are more closely associated with Britain than a steaming cup of tea. But tea is far more than a drink in British culture. It can be a gesture of hospitality, a moment of comfort, a break from work, or even a social ritual that brings people together when they have nothing else to say. The phrase, "put the kettle on," can almost function as an emotional response to a crisis. Someone has had a difficult day? Make tea. A friend arrives unexpectedly? Make tea. Something awkward happens in a conversation, there is a good chance that tea will somehow appear. What makes this tradition so interesting is the way an imported luxury became woven into the everyday rhythm of British life. Over time, tea moved from being something associated with wealth and sophistication to something so ordinary that many people can hardly imagine a British kitchen without a kettle nearby. Then there is the British pub, perhaps one of the country's most important social institutions. A traditional pub is not simply a place to drink. Historically, it has been a meeting point, a place for conversation, celebration, debate, and community life. In many towns and villages, the local pub became a kind of informal social center where people from different backgrounds could meet under the same roof. The atmosphere could change completely depending on the occasion. One evening might involve quiet conversations over a drink, while another could bring together friends watching a football match, celebrating a birthday, or simply escaping the weather outside. Even the architecture of older pubs tells a story, with centuries of local history hidden behind wooden doors, old signs, and rooms that have witnessed countless generations come and go. And then comes Sunday roast, a meal that transforms food into a weekly ritual. For many families, the tradition is about much more than roast meat, potatoes, vegetables, and Yorkshire pudding. It is about timing, gathering, and the feeling that Sunday is somehow different from every other day. The meal can be elaborate or simple, served at home or enjoyed in a pub, but the underlying idea remains remarkably consistent. People come together around a table. In a rapidly changing society where schedules are increasingly fragmented, these rituals provide something increasingly valuable, a sense of continuity. You may forget what you ate on an ordinary Tuesday, but the Sunday roast with your family can become a memory that stays for decades. And perhaps That is the secret behind Britain's most enduring traditions. They are not simply customs people follow. They are moments people remember. Imagine standing in the middle of London and suddenly watching a ceremony unfold that seems to belong to another century. Soldiers march with extraordinary precision. Uniforms appear almost untouched by time. Horses move through the streets, and crowds gather to witness a ritual whose origins stretch deep into British history. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of the United Kingdom. The past is not locked away inside museums. It is still performed in public. Royal ceremonies, military traditions, and state occasions continue to create moments of extraordinary spectacle, combining pageantry with history in a way that feels almost cinematic. To someone seeing it for the first time, it can seem surreal. A modern city filled with smartphones, skyscrapers, and traffic suddenly becoming the stage for a ceremony rooted in centuries of tradition. Few examples capture this better than the changing of the guard. What might initially look like a carefully choreographed tourist attraction is actually connected to the long history of protecting the monarch and the royal residences. The precision, uniforms, music, and military discipline all contribute to a ritual that has become internationally recognizable. Yet there is something deeper happening beneath the spectacle. These ceremonies demonstrate how Britain has managed to preserve symbols of continuity even as the country itself has changed dramatically. Governments have come and gone, empires have risen and fallen, technology has transformed everyday life, and society has been reshaped countless times. Yet certain rituals remain, creating the impression that somewhere beneath all that change, a connection with the past still survives. Perhaps the most intriguing part is that British ceremonial traditions are not frozen in time. They continue to evolve, even when they appear ancient. The meaning people attach to them can change, the audiences watching them can change, and the way the ceremonies are presented to the world can change. A ritual that once existed primarily for political or religious reasons may now carry cultural significance for millions of people who see it as part of the country's identity. This creates a fascinating question. When people preserve a tradition, are they preserving the original meaning, or are they creating something entirely new from the remains of the past? In Britain, the answer is often both. The ceremony survives, but every generation gives it another layer of meaning. There are traditions in Britain that seem perfectly normal until you stop and think about them. Imagine gathering with your neighbors on a cold November evening, watching an enormous fire burn while fireworks explode overhead, eating food outdoors despite the freezing weather, and somehow considering this an entirely reasonable way to celebrate. This is the atmosphere surrounding Bonfire Night, one of the most distinctive dates on the British calendar. Its historical connection to the gunpowder plot gives the occasion a dramatic foundation, but the modern celebration has developed into something much broader. For many people, it is now associated with community gatherings, spectacular fireworks, bonfires, and the unmistakable feeling of winter beginning. It is a tradition where history, entertainment, and childhood memories have become inseparable. Then there are traditions that appear almost impossible to explain to an outsider. Morris dancing, for example, brings together music, colorful costumes, bells, handkerchiefs, and highly energetic movements that can look wonderfully strange when encountered for the first time. Yet behind the unusual appearance lies a tradition connected to local communities and folk culture, with different regions developing their own styles and interpretations. Like many folk traditions, Morris dancing has experienced periods of decline and revival, but it has managed to survive because people continue to find value in keeping these local customs alive. In a world where cultural experiences can increasingly feel identical from one place to another, these traditions offer something different, a connection to a specific community, a particular region, and a history that cannot easily be replicated somewhere else. What makes Britain's unusual celebration so fascinating is the sheer variety of emotions they can evoke. Some traditions are solemn, others are joyful, and some seem to exist somewhere in between. There are events built around remembrance, celebrations marking seasonal changes, and customs that have survived simply because people enjoy doing them together. The deeper you look, the more you realize that British traditions are not always designed to make logical sense. Their power comes from repetition and participation. Children watch adults take part, then grow up and introduce the same customs to their own families. The details may change, but the ritual continues. And perhaps that is why some of the strangest traditions can become the most memorable. They create experiences that are difficult to forget. The United Kingdom of today is vastly different from the country that existed when many of these traditions first appeared. Cities have expanded, technology has transformed communication, communities have become more diverse, and everyday life moves at a pace that previous generations could hardly have imagined. Yet traditions continue to survive. Why? Perhaps because in a world that changes constantly, people still need something that feels familiar. A tradition can provide a sense of belonging, connecting someone not only to their family, but also to a community and a larger cultural story. Whether it is sharing a meal, attending a ceremony, watching fireworks, or gathering in a local pub, these moments create a sense of continuity that modern life often struggles to provide. But traditions are not necessarily preserved because everyone agrees on their original meaning. In fact, many survive precisely because they are flexible enough to adapt. A custom can be reinterpreted by each generation, allowing it to remain relevant without completely losing its connection to the past. This is particularly important in a country as historically complex as the United Kingdom. British identity has never been a single, simple story. It is a mixture of English, Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish traditions, shaped by migration, regional cultures, religion, monarchy, industrialization, and centuries of political change. The result is a cultural landscape where traditions can sometimes overlap, compete, evolve, or even acquire completely new meanings. And perhaps this is the greatest secret behind Britain's most iconic traditions. They survive not because the country refuses to change, but because traditions themselves are capable of changing with it. The tea may be served differently, the pub may look different. Ceremonies may be watched by audiences around the world, and celebrations may take on new meanings. Yet the fundamental human desire remains the same: to gather, to remember, to celebrate, and to feel connected to something larger than ourselves. That is why these traditions continue to matter. They are living links between generations, reminders that history is not simply something that happened long ago. Sometimes, history is something we continue to perform, and every time we do, we give it another chance to survive.